The Federal Reserve. You're up, bitches. What if I told you the U.S. central bank, the one printing money, bailing out banks, setting interest rates, is not really run by the government and may have intentionally caused the greatest global financial crisis in our history in order to gain its power and control? Let's talk about the Federal Reserve, how it's structured, what it actually does, and why the Great Depression might not be the accident we were taught. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 through the Federal Reserve Act. On paper, it is a public-private hybrid. The Board of Governors in Washington is a government agency appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate, and technically accountable to Congress. Oh, well, that sounds pretty dang official to me. What seems to be the ossifer problem? That's only half the story. The 12 regional Federal Reserve banks are structured more like private corporations. Member banks actually own stock in their own regional Fed. Now, it's stock that can't be traded, but it pays them dividends, means they get money back. More importantly, it gives them a literal seat at the table. This is the first red flag. A central bank that isn't fully public, whose decision makers are a mix of government appointees and private banking insiders. It's like inviting the fox to help design the henhouse. Defenders of the Federal Reserve like to say, well, the board is appointed by the president, so it's technically part of the federal government. Okay. Now, I don't know why I made them sound like that. Maybe because that's how they sound to me when I hear them talk. I mean, no disrespect. All I hear, it's the federal government. What are you guys talking about? Time and time again, people who end up in these roles are career bankers, Wall Street veterans, and financial insiders. It's a revolving door. One day they're at Goldman Sachs, and the next they're regulating the system they helped build. And then when they retire, well, guess what? They just end up back on Goldman Sachs. I don't know how you don't find that suspicious. Someone leaves a financial institution to regulate that financial institution, and then when they're done, they go back at an extremely alarming salary or retainer, sometimes as consultants or board members, and they just get paid out the wazoo. What did they do to deserve that? Was it maybe they were on a regulatory board and were able to kind of fucking, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours? It's like telling your 5-year-old, I'm going to leave you alone in this room with a mountain of cookies. You're the only one that can tattle on yourself. Don't eat any cookies. And then acting surprised when you come back to a room with no cookies in it. What? What the hell? And then the culprit is like, I don't know what happened to the cookies. They said it wasn't them. They gotta be telling the truth. I mean, leave your dog in a room with a bag full of treats and tell him to regulate his treat intake. Let me know how that works out. They have all the power in the world and no one can do anything about it. Or so they think. You've got a small group of elite bankers essentially regulating themselves with no real consequences when things go sideways. I don't see a problem with that. I don't know. Now let's get to the Great Depression, the part most people never talk about. The Great Depression wasn't just a random tragedy. There is compelling evidence that the Federal Reserve policies made it far worse. Some argue they even allowed it to happen on purpose. Leading up to the crash of 1929, banks were inflating bubbles like never before. And when things started to go south, the Federal Reserve had the power to step in. And guess what they did? Nothing. They didn't do nothing. Instead, they let the money supply contract. They kept interest rates high, and they clung to the gold standard like a life raft while the economy was sinking. At the time, Milton Friedman and Friedman Schwartz, both mainstream economists, not tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy nuts, showed that the Fed monetary contraction was a major driver of the Depression. Bank after bank collapsed. Millions lost their jobs, their homes, and their entire life savings. And what did the Fed do? Almost nothing. Their response at the time was considered suspiciously slow. Sounds like a good stand-up group of guys to me. I don't know what everyone's so worked up about. They sound like a bunch of great people that would never let the Titanic sink on purpose just because it would allow them to pass the Federal Reserve Act a year earlier. That's a story for another video. Watch the Titanic video. It was released a couple weeks ago. Congressman Louis T. McFadden, who chaired the House Banking Committee at the time, went on record accusing the Fed and bankers of deliberately engineering the crash to consolidate power. For the record, that's not me saying this. That's a sitting member of Congress living through this in the 1930s. The theory of why and and how they did it goes like this. After the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913, the Fed was still a somewhat new, untested entity, but when the Great Depression hit and the Fed allowed the financial system to collapse, it created a national panic. People and the government turned to the Fed for salvation, and in doing so, they handed it massive amounts of power, cementing it as the central authority over U.S. banking and monetary policies. Whether you believe the Depression was manufactured or simply manipulated through inaction, the outcome is the same. An unelected body with private influence gained control over America's financial future after a crisis that devastated millions and cost the lives of an untold number of the country's hardworking citizens, all basically innocent bystanders. There's this thing that happens where people like to say, it was decades ago, even if it was intentional. It's not the same Federal Reserve that's around now. That argument drives me nuts, and here's why. It reminds me of when people say that about the three-letter agencies, I won't say the name, protect myself from the future algo overlords. It reminds me of a certain three-letter agency that's like, yeah, well, we admitted to attempting mind control and secretly submitting people to illicit drugs and testing them without their knowledge, and testing chemical weapons on our military and innocent civilians without their knowledge, intentionally harming its own citizens. But that was like a few decades ago. Why would they do anything like that now? If that's what we know and what they're willing to openly admit they did, what makes you think the same, if not worse, is not happening now? I can never understand the disconnect between time apparently magically fixing everything. It's like you have a rotten organization from the core allowed to go unchecked for decades, and in that time span, magically, it got good without any oversight or anybody regulating what they're doing. Basically, an endless supply of get-out-of-jail-free cards. It's actually like having a never even go to jail in the first place card and expecting that people with absolute power are going to just self-regulate. It's sort of an insane assumption to make, but people who frame themselves as rational thinking skeptics will make this boldly insane claim. In my opinion, the default position should always be to mistrust those in power. Just like investigative journalism, if it still existed, default position should be not trust what the government's saying, have to prove the government is telling the truth. Freedom of press, freedom of speech exists for those reasons. It operates as a checks and balance system for the people that hold the power over the citizens of the country. That's the whole premise the country was founded on, holding the power accountable to its people. Make them prove it to you. Make them prove that they're telling you the truth. Fast forward to today. The Fed operates independently from Congress. It doesn't rely on taxpayer money, and it funds itself. It can expand its balance sheet, inject trillions, and bail out whoever it wants behind closed doors. During every major crisis, like 08 and 2020, the Fed plays kingmaker. It decides which institutions survive and which don't. And sure, it's audited, but certain emergency operations remain opaque, and the average citizen has no real say whatsoever on what happens. This isn't just some dusty history lesson. These decisions affect your rent, your mortgage, your job, your savings, your life. If the same institution that may have either let the Great Depression happen or intentionally manufactured it, all just to gain power, still controls those levers today, shouldn't we at the very least understand what it is and what it does and what it's capable of? So what do you think? Was the Great Depression just a tragic failure of a financial institution, a carefully exploited crisis, or intentionally engineered? As always, please let me know your theories in the comments. Stay safe, stay grounded, like and follow, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace. Just making sure that bird ain't watching. That bird been watching since I did the bird video. That motherfucker's been up there just watching my ass, bro. Crazy.